Last night, we had one of the biggest interviews in world history between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. On top of that, we have Europe sending in a nuclear arsenal of trying to wipe out free speech. England is trying to have people arrested in other countries. We're going to go through all of this. To help me do that, I have cyber expert Mike Benz. Mike, thank you so much for joining me again.
Thanks, Stephen. Always fun to have these conversations.
So Kamala's election team is requiring that if you go to one of her rallies, you must show an ID to enter the venue. Yet Kamala and others say requiring an ID to vote for president of the United States is racist. Is this one of the best examples of hypocrisy and rigging a system in the favor of one party? What are your thoughts on that?
I wish it were just hypocrisy, but it's obviously strategy. I mean, the fact is if you just look at some of the Project Veritas videos going around to DNC campaigners and election officials, it was clear 8 years ago that election fraud seemed to be embedded within some of the strategies of the DNC. And I'm sure that historically the RNC has participated in this as well. But the fact is everyone knows what the voter ID thing is, right? I mean, this is using this highly inflated concept of racism and everyone being afraid of being called a racist to try to block the ability to have election integrity over the most basic common sense measures. Virtually every other country in the world requires voter ID. What are you going to say that, voters, that the lion's share of the electorate doesn't fly on airplanes, doesn't purchase alcohol, doesn't purchase any goods? There's what you need to do an ID in this kind. And the fact is they even reject a voter ID when the state provides a voter ID. Some of the attempted workarounds around this from, frankly, cowardly Republicans who say, okay, well, I don't want to be called a racist, so how about we'll do voter ID, but the state will issue a state-centered ID just for that, for that person, so that they can have one if the issue is not having access. And the Democrats still reject that. So everyone knows what this is. You have to plow right through it and just get the voter ID on the books. And some states have successfully required that over the past 4 years, but they face against them a giant legal arsenal on the other side, from the National Lawyers Guild down to Mark Elias and his cohort, who are hell-bent on protecting the ability to win elections through fraud.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Speaking of winning elections through fraud, after the 2020 election, I kept hearing a lot about Dominion voting systems and this group, Smartmatic. And then now I'm seeing, wait a minute, like maybe the elections in Venezuela were rigged. And then now the co-founder and president of Smartmatic, the electronic voting machines, Roger Piñate, he has surrendered to the authorities in Miami, Florida, for rigging elections for other countries, bribery, money laundering. What are your thoughts on this? And has any of that Smartmatic election fraud bled into the United States?
Well, there's a dazzling swirl of bad news around both Dominion and Smartmatic. If you remember, about 2 months ago, Dominion is now currently under investigation by the Puerto Rican government because of wrongly counting 150,000 votes there. I mean, that's a small election, and the government itself says that Dominion accidentally flipped 150,000 votes. So that's Dominion, and then Smartmatic, the other major electronic voting machine. Yeah, so it's not just the co-founder and president, but also I think it was the COO and CTO. I mean, it was basically the entire C-suite level team almost that got wrapped up there. Now, I have some questions about what precisely gave rise to those indictments, because for the longest time, these entities, Dominion and Smartmatic, have been very much protected by the U.S. federal government. A great example of that is the scandal around CISA, the DHS censorship agency. It calls itself a cybersecurity agency, but it mission creeped its way all the way into social media censorship by arguing that tweets that contain misinformation about elections are a cyber attack on our critical infrastructure. And so CISA has deep partnerships with both Dominion and Smartmatic. They're a part of this this election integrity council. So there's basically a public-private partnership between them. And in fact, of the 22 million tweets that were targeted as misinformation narratives by CISA's outsourced censorship squad, the Election Integrity Partnership, 7 million of those were tweets about Dominion. So you had 7 million tweets, First Amendment protected critical tweets about Dominion that were hand protected effectively by the United States federal government. They basically argued that anyone who criticized Dominion's election machines, the way they counted it, the technical know-how there, was conducting a cyber attack if you on the United States of America if you smeared the good name of Dominion. And there was a very close relationship between Dominion and CISA at a personal level. Chris Krebs, the founder of CISA, the orchestra conductor of the censorship operation of the 2020 election, even bragged 2 years later, while Dominion was suing Fox News, that he thought that he hoped Dominion would bankrupt Fox News in the defamation case, and bragged on tape that he knows the Dominion CEO personally and knows that he's not going to let go of that bone, and he's going to shake Fox until they're dry. Now, this is the sort of thing that is absolutely insane when you take a step back and you look at it and you think that CISA is supposed to be in charge of cybersecurity of our elections, but they are in charge of censorship of anyone who criticizes the security. I mean, this is like putting the defendant in a murder trial as installed as the judge and the jury. I mean, this is a perfect cover-up for a crime if you did do one.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I didn't realize there was that connection. Whenever the government bends over backwards to supply coverage for somebody, it makes me very suspicious. Like, why were they fighting so hard to defend Dominion and censor speech? It reminds me of the COVID shots, where you weren't allowed to talk about Pfizer, you weren't allowed to talk about COVID, the shots, the horrible side effects. Like, all of that was wallpapered over with beautiful paper saying that Pfizer is a gift from God. Your arms belong to big pharma. I see the same thing with the election situation. I didn't realize it was so bad. I remember reading the article about Puerto Rico, but I didn't realize that they had proven that they had flipped. What did you say? 150,000 votes in favor of one person or one party?
I believe that's the allegation. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So part of this is, I mean, it's a con game, right? I mean, the con in con man or con game stands for confidence. What you're doing is you are artificially inflating a sense of confidence in the other person so that you can get away with a scam or a crime. And it's amazing because they even use that technical language. Anyone who undermines public faith or confidence in our election processes or outcomes. That's what CISA formally described it as. And they said anyone who undermines public faith or confidence in vaccine efficacy. And that's how they got away with naming the DHS censorship office the Office of Mis, Dis, and Malinformation. The malinformation there means even if it's true, but it undermines public faith and confidence. This is how you had Election Integrity Partnership and Virality Project. Those were the respective names of the censorship squads for the 2020 election and the COVID-19 pandemic, that they would send censorship demands to places like Twitter 1.0 and Facebook and YouTube and say that anyone who even self-reported in a Facebook post or a YouTube video or a Twitter post that they had experienced adverse effects, some sort of negative symptoms from taking the COVID vaccine, that even self-described injuries should be censored on the site because it's a form of malinformation, because even if it's true, it still undermines public faith and confidence in our critical infrastructure, our public health ecosystem. Yeah. So it's a very nasty, combination of, academies, censor speak, and bureaucratic, government jargon in order to get long-arm jurisdiction over, your thoughts, your words, your soul.
Okay. Wow. Dang. Okay. In America, we believe we have freedom of speech as a God-given right. However, leaders over in the United Kingdom say that people around the world breaking their speech laws will now have their local governments contacted to have that person extradited to the United Kingdom so that they can stand trial for crimes. This sounds like something out of a horrible 1984 novel. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it sounds like something out of an op-ed I wrote 2.5 years ago, where I called all of this. I mean, the fact is this has been a long time coming, and this is really not a story about the United Kingdom or the EU. The fact is, censorship 1.0 in this country came about from a very similar process. I call it the transatlantic flank attack. And what I mean by that is you have both the United States State Department, military, and intelligence cabal, the blob, teamed up with their counterparts in Europe, predominantly the United Kingdom and Brussels, in order to flank free speech on both sides of the Atlantic. And this 1-2 punch is very powerful. So, you had this situation in 2016 where you had these State Department exiles, everyone who thought they were going to get promoted when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton became president of the United States. And they all thought they were going to get promoted up into the National Security Council, and they all got unceremoniously fired when Donald Trump became president instead. But they had a very special set of skills, which was working with European regulators and ministers in the foreign affairs and in various regulatory agencies across Europe, which for doing sort of road shows to get Europe to change its own laws from the inside. This is what the State Department does. This is what diplomats do. And this is what they did in 2014 when they did the sanctions roadshow after Crimea was annexed and joined the Russian Federation, after the humiliating counter coup that happened in Ukraine. You had this whole cadre led by this Atlantic Council network. Daniel Fried, for example, was the sanctions coordinator for the Obama administration for all of that. He'd been 40 years in the State Department, director on CIA cutout organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy. And then in February 2017, he leaves the State Department and runs this network out of the Atlantic Council, where he's a director and a major figure there in the Eurasia Center, in the Scowcroft Center, and it's connected to this whole digital forensics research lab that does the censorship work. And they basically held a whole series of global disinformation summits where they did this road show across France, across the UK, across Greece, across Spain, across Germany. And they managed to effectively coerce, jawbone, and maybe benignly, you can say, persuade European governments to begin passing censorship laws that would have the impact of throttling American conservatives voting for Donald Trump. And they were very deliberate with the way they constructed this. At the time, the European regulators and these U.S. State Department exiles were verklempt that the tech companies were too big, that their culture of freedom and independence and piracy, frankly, from the American government was too much for them to overcome. And it's amazing when you go back and you watch these summits, how they were hyping each other up. Like, okay, it's if just one of us tries it, maybe they can stop it. But with our forces combined, if we get all of Europe to do this, and they were very clear, this Atlantic Council network, they were saying, listen, we have a First Amendment in this country, and it would be too much too soon. We need to boil this frog slowly. We can't do this in the United States. But what's amazing is they knew Russiagate was coming. And there's a great quote from a NATO Stratcom meeting in early 2017 where someone effectively says, a little birdie told me that impeachment might be on the table with this Russiagate situation. And there's going to be a crisis moment for free speech on the internet because of Russian intervention. And we need to have solutions locked in place for when that crisis comes. And that's when they can become cemented. So it may look too green to do now, but Europe's got to get the ball moving. And so they persuaded Germany to pass a law called NetzDG. And NetsGG had a really nasty penalty associated, $50 million in fines for any platform that left any incident of hate speech up on the platform for more than 48 hours after being flagged. Now, this required artificial intelligence, mass scan and ban technology to be adopted by all of the major platforms as a safe harbor provision to get out of that regulation. But that effectively ended the evolutionary arms race between manual censorship. Everyone thought before 2016, well, no matter how much they try to censor us, they can only hire so many censors. They take down a post, we'll put up a new post. But now everything is done through AI. This is how you have Dominion 7 million votes. They didn't, 7 million tweets. They didn't manually scroll through that. What they do is they have military contractors like MITRE write up censorship software that has machine learning, training models of keywords and confidence intervals for, words between words to try to sync meaning. They have a whole database, a whole sort of vocabulary that they log, and then they fine tune it until it's basically perfected so that anyone who criticizes a government narrative or a political movement that's favored by the U.S. State Department gets automatically scanned and banned from the internet. But that all came from Europe in 2017, but that itself came from the United States State Department. Why do you think it is that the U.S. State Department has not issued a press release defending the X or Elon Musk? Why did the State Department, how fast would they swoop in on Venezuela or Saudi Arabia or, Kazakhstan if they nationalized ExxonMobil, or if that government snapped and shut a regulation and threatened to arrest Rex Tillerson or Bill Gates, the head of Microsoft? How fast the State Department would be swooping in, parachuting practically with an army of diplomats to threaten sanctioning them into the ground unless they ceased, desisted, and apologized, and maybe even offered reparations. But you don't see any of that because the State Department is behind this. They have a whole, and I can get into this, they have a whole government program for forcing foreign governments to pass internal censorship laws. It's called CEPS. It's Center for Excellence in Political Process Strengthening. It's funded by USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy. I have a whole report on it coming out in a few months. But the fact is this is not an accident, and it's really not coming from the United Kingdom or the EU. The fire's coming from inside the house.
Interesting. So it's like they outsource it to Europe to not look bad, and then allow Europe to trash our freedom of speech and manipulate us. That's really
well. It's
really
worse than that. It's not just not to look bad. It's that Europe, we do have a First Amendment in this country, and we have a culture of a First Amendment in this country. I mean, not only does the United Kingdom not have a First Amendment, they have something called a D notice, where the government can just issue a mandate to the media not to report on something, and the media is then immediately sealed shut. I mean, we had rare instances in this country where that was done illegally. JFK basically did the same thing during the Cuban Missile Crisis, after the Miami Herald and others were reporting sensitive information about it. But that was not supposed to happen. And but they have not only the legal purview to create those what they call international norms and standards, but they also have a culture that is okay with it. So once that becomes the international norm and standard, the United States, it becomes less of a big deal for the United States to do it or to copy elements of it. But the other part of it is, and this gets back to this, the two ways that the foreign policy establishment can kill you. One of them is with a knife attack, and this is an analogy, okay? But one of them is like, they walk up to you and just do it directly. And to do that, they'll do something using like a counterintelligence predicate. They will say, well, you're actually a Russian asset. And so now we get to wiretap your phones. We get to do keyloggers on your computers to do every search history you've ever done. We get to audit all your bank accounts to see anyone who's ever given you a penny. And we get to, arrest you, indict you, or snow you with $10 million in legal fees. That's the sort of knife attack when the CIA or the State Department or the Pentagon wants to get you from the inside. But if they can't do that, they have a second weapon, which is a boomerang. Boomerang is a toy, but it's also a weapon. You can sharpen the blade of it, and you can use it to do very nasty things. And so what they do is, in this case, is it's a boomerang tactic. They are not allowed to knife Americans over free speech They can do it for counterintelligence. If you're backed by a hostile foreign intelligence agency without a FAR registration, they can do the knife. But if they don't have the jurisdiction for the knife, they use the boomerang, which is that they throw it out to Europe first, and they get Europe to then send it back and slice open Americans. And that's basically what's happening here with this EU letter. And I should note one more thing, just because if nothing else, it's funny. That threat letter from the head of the EU Commission to Elon Musk and Donald Trump was not just the EU threatening citizens from a non-EU country, but one of the things they said not to talk about in the letter was unrest happening in the United Kingdom. Well, need I remind everyone, the United Kingdom left the EU. So for jurisdictional purposes, the EU may as well be telling people on Venus not to talk about people on planet Mars, lest they get hauled into the EU and extradited for international crimes. But the fact is Speaker Johnson, if you're listening to this, any member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, which has a Republican majority, if you're listening, you can take immediate action against all of this. You can defund the swarm army of NGOs that gave rise to the pressure campaign to put this letter out in the first place, to create this EU Digital Services Act censorship ecosystem in the first place. All of it has to be defunded, this entire censorship mercenary army.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that they had the balls to try to tell a former president of the United States to be quiet, that his voice and opinion can't be over the public, communication systems, the front runner running for president and the richest man in the world. I mean, this coordinated attack and bullying and trying to intimidate them into canceling this event, it is unprecedented. And yet this thing ends up getting over 1 billion views, listens, touch points, according to X data that was released this morning. Why do you think they tried so hard to shut this down? Is it because Trump and Musk would be able to reach so much of the global population? What are your thoughts on why they worked so hard to shut this interview down?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but first, I would argue that I don't see the EU threat letter to X as being an example of balls. I mean, I don't think European regulators really have balls. I mean, what you if they felt like they would feel the full force of the United States government in retaliation for the letter, they'd never send it. The fact is there are back channels. They know that the Harris administration and the Biden presidency will protect them, that their Democrat allies in Congress will protect them, that frankly, some of the Republican allies in the United States Congress will protect them, and that they have the comfort of this being a transatlantic big tent operation, so to speak. And so, that again, just to emphasize that, I think is really what's driving it. But the fact is there, I mean, there's a number of reasons why they want to stop Elon and Donald, Trump from teaming up. I mean, besides the obvious, right? Elon has more capital than reportedly any other individual, in the world. He also has an incredible amount of social clout. He's internationally beloved for non-political reasons. But if you recall, we went through something not too dissimilar about 8 months ago when Tucker Carlson tried to interview Vladimir Putin. If you remember, the first time Tucker tried to interview Putin, he had his phone hacked by the National Security Agency, and a whistleblower ended up warning him that they could read every one of his text messages and that he might get arrested for attempting to interview the president of a foreign country. And that Tucker even said afterwards that he was very sensitive about the questions he asked Putin because of a fear that if he did not give an adversarial interview, at least in part, that action would be taken against him by the United States Justice Department on any number of falsified grounds. But the fact is I think that was, frankly, I think that the tech issues at the beginning of the space probably worked out in Elon's benefit in terms of his personal safety, in the same way that I think if the Tucker Putin interview had made Putin look great, that would have become an international diplomacy incident. The fact that Putin sort of went on rambling about esoteric 6th century history for the first 45 minutes of it, and the fact that Tucker asked about freeing Evan, the Wall Street Journal reporter, and sort of painting Putin as a authoritarian dictator who locks up journalists, like these sorts of things, I think actually probably protected Tucker from what could have been a criminal prosecution if he had made an enemy of the state look good. And Donald Trump is effectively an enemy of the state. It's a very similar situation here. But the other part of it is, remember, wasn't just Europe. We had at a White House press conference the morning before it happened, a reporter from no less than the Washington Post, the paper of record in Washington, D.C., formally implore the White House press secretary to use the White House's power to do something to stop the upcoming space between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Now, there's a number of reasons that the media is interested in this. Now, remember, the media is a part of this whole of society censorship alliance, which spans the government, the private sector, the civil society organizations, and the media. And they've had this alliance in place for 8 years now. But part of this is because the media has this favors relationship with the government. Part of it is because the media is able to put unique pressure on private sector entities through bad press and crisis PR and driving advertiser boycotts. But the other part of it is because the only way you'd normally be able to reach 1 billion people is through an interview with someone from a mainstream media outlet. This is your end running the media. How else could you normally reach a billion people? I mean, remember, this was effectively, and this is one of the novelties of X Spaces, is that it allows direct conversations. It allows anyone to immediately become an interviewer. And because these two individuals uniquely have such large readerships by their own, the Donald Trump account has 90 million followers. The Elon Musk account has 195 million followers. So combined, you're at 300 million followers right there, in addition to the media event. But normally, this would be a 60 minutes or a Face the Nation type thing. And so the act of doing this effectively puts the Washington Post interviewers out of a job. So this is an existential threat to their business model, which is another reason why the media is asking the government to cram down on other journalists. This is not a betrayal of free speech. Again, this is not hypocrisy, it's strategy.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Do you I noticed last night it sounded like Donald Trump had a lisp or a broken tooth or something like that. Yet this morning I saw video from inside the room where Trump was doing the interview, and his voice sounded completely normal. I don't think that, Elon set anything. And do you think that there was some kind of bad connection with the audio, or what might have caused that?
Yeah, it could have been. I actually didn't notice the lisp on mine. I heard other people refer to it, but I was actually doing a live stream for my followers, sort of annotating as it was happening. And I kept remarking to everyone how clear the audio was. And so I actually didn't detect that. So I don't know if that was only on some devices. But the other thing that I'd say is there have been issues. I do a Sunday office hours using X Spaces every Sunday for 2 hours. And there's frequently audio issues not too dissimilar to that. So I don't necessarily ascribe a malevolent motive to that, but it is worth noting that Elon did say that there was a very large DDoS attack, to basically that prevented the on-time start of the event. And we don't have many details on that, but it would not surprise me if there were, you have this whole NAFO, troll, government paid troll army that basically simulates, the kind of Pepe avatars of the Trump movement in 2016, but it's sort of used to advance war against Russia. And, that whole troll army is tied into these very weird hacking networks around both NATO and the US Pentagon and the UK Ministry of Defense. And I would not be surprised if there was some sort of, quasi-amateur, quasi-professional attempt to sabotage the event at the beginning of it, but I doubt that would leak all the way into technical audio issues.
Okay. What were your thoughts on the interview? I thought it was very well done. I thought Elon Musk brought up some really excellent points. I thought Donald Trump had some very interesting answers. It felt very conversational versus like a 60 minutes trying to get gotchas on live TV with former President Donald Trump. What were your thoughts on that? Because the media, I saw Elon Musk posted something this morning where it's like thousands of articles with headlines saying, Trump sound like an old rambling man. This was a disaster. This proves that Elon Musk is biased. This proves that Twitter's not ready for this level of political involvement. What were your thoughts on the interview?
It was cool. It was exactly what they advertised it was. Neither more nor less. Yeah, I was remarking last night, just in my summary, that when they advertised this a week ago, they didn't really bill it as anything in particular other than a conversation. They didn't say, we're going to cover these topics, or it's going to be this big blowout event. There's going to be all this fanfare. It was like, hey, we're just going to talk on stream for a couple hours and see how it goes. And that's what it was. And, I thought Elon said something very perceptive at the start of the space, which was, this is just a conversation. It's not really an interview. And it's not, we're getting in a lot of trouble for doing this because this is not an adversarial interview. But the fact is people aren't themselves during adversarial interviews. When you do an adversarial interview, the adversarial interviewer is being deliberately adversarial, and the adversarial interviewee is deliberately trying to, walk tiptoe, tap dance, tango its way through a minefield to avoid bad headlines the next day, and are never really themselves, never really let their hair down, never really open up, and you don't get to really see the authentic, organic, genuine person that they are. And when Elon laid that out, I thought, that's really very true. And that is one of the very unique things about X as a peer-to-peer information platform instead of a broadcast media outlet, where you're not really necessarily even in campaign mode. Now I actually thought that Trump was great in parts, but there were many parts where I felt like he was sort of unnecessarily in campaign mode when he didn't have to be, because I think Trump was actually expecting it to be more of an interview than it was. We know that Trump and Elon talk on the phone not infrequently. Both Trump and Elon have said this publicly. And I think maybe Trump, seeing that there was 60 million views on it halfway through, or maybe just having not done something like this before, because that is what X Spaces are. They're very, very casual, colloquial. It's not an interview. I mean, it's just not really the vibe of it, if you will. In part because, you have everybody all around you. You can see the scrolling list of everyone who's in the room with you. And I think that Trump didn't, was sort of doing campaign type things that he didn't necessarily have to at a number of spaces. So I think there's another level of genuine, authentic, conversation between these two that I think that they could do if they were to run this back, but it was nice to see flashes of last night.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see those two just sit down and have a private conversation at Mar-a-Lago or at SpaceX or something like that. The two great American companies. I'll just point out two things that stood out to me, one from each of them. I think Trump did a good job of pointing out the nostalgia that many Americans have for affordable living during the Trump years. They worked tremendously hard before COVID to have the budgets in line. They put pressure for people to, charge the appropriate amount of money. They worked hard to be energy dominant, which made life very affordable. I thought that he did just a great job of explaining, hey, this is what it was like while I was president. I thought Elon Musk did a great job of pointing out to Trump, hey, listen, if you can get the out of control spending in Washington, D.C. under control, inflation evaporates. And all of a sudden, life becomes livable and good again. And from a billionaire standpoint that runs a massive multi-100,000 employee company going, if you can control your costs, you could be a force, a magnificent force for good in the world and for your own citizens. Those were the two things that stood out to me, one from each of them. Was there something that specifically stood out to you?
Well, there were some interesting things that I just didn't remember hearing about before this. I think he gave a personal story about China and warning China off of doing a oil and gas deal with Iran, and that he said, China basically backed down, and that Trump would enforce sanctions against them if they did that. And I thought that was a very interesting. I've never seen that reported before. He may have mentioned it in another interview that I've never seen, but I thought that was very interesting because just 2 months after Trump left office, China signed a $400 billion oil and gas deal with Iran. It's like the moment he left, China got a $500 billion worth of oil and gas at a bargain basement price, and the Biden administration let China do it. We have international sanctions against Iran, and Biden just let China evade the sanctions to the tune of $500 billion. But China was afraid of Trump enforcing sanctions against them. So that to me is a very, I had to kind of do a double take when I heard that, because, that's a very clear and obvious motive for China to want to get rid of Trump and put in the Biden administration, and use all of the contacts that they have from the Pelosi network and beyond in the Democrat Party, the Hunter Biden network. Hunter Biden obviously runs the China story in a big way, and the head of Chinese intelligence was a personal client of Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden was auctioning off U.S. LNG ports, liquefied natural gas ports in Louisiana to Chinese investors. That to me was like, that rose really weird questions, frankly, about COVID-19 and this strange alliance between the U.S. Pentagon and intelligence services and their counterparts in China, that they had a mutual enemy in Trump. And the minute Trump was gone, China effectively made off with $500 billion in an oil and gas deal. That I thought was very troubling. But the fact is it was cool to see some other things. Trump was ribbing Elon a number of times, talking about how his jet was bigger than Elon's jet. And, it was interesting to watch them almost have these kind of locker room moments where they're sort of ribbing each other, and they're sort of, eyeing up the other one's measure of success. Obviously Elon is a much higher net worth, but Trump was the commander in chief, and they're both sort of drawn together. It almost reminded me of a kind of, high school quarterback and the top math student in the school being, almost like a weird bromance sitcom where they both need to go on some quest together using their own highly specialized, set of strengths and weaknesses. But it was cool to see that. And the fact is it was just regular. It was just ordinary. It was what an ordinary, it's what a lot of interviews, frankly, even something like that with Kamala Harris or with Joe Biden, where it's just two people talking and it's not even an interview, actually, I think, may be more useful to the voters than an interview, just a conversation. How do these people look when they don't really think that we're scrutinizing their every word?
Yeah. And I do wonder if that hadn't been live, if there would have been less pressure and more just two intelligent people that have been extremely successful having a conversation about how to make America great again. Or, I also thought it was really interesting how Elon Musk said, hey, listen, I've maybe done more for green energy than anyone on the planet. Yet we can't demonize oil and gas. They still run the world. Like even Tesla needs those. Anyway, it was just a great conversation. I hope that people will go watch that and just continue to push that number up, because it was a great conversation. Okay, I wanted to ask you a couple more things. Are you still okay on time?
I have about 5 minutes here, if
Okay,
that's
so
sorry.
let me just quickly get your thoughts on two things. The Trump assassination, the FBI now saying that they don't want to release much of the information. Are they burying anything? Or because I feel like lately Christopher Wray really operates under the umbrella of, we have an open investigation, therefore we can't tell the American people anything, and we'll just keep that open investigation in order to give the FBI coverage. And what were your thoughts on the Trump assassination and FBI situation?
That's exactly it. I mean, what you just said. This is what they did with the January 6th pipe bomber, right? I mean, they've had an open investigation for almost 4 years now. They've not disclosed a single new video file in 3.5 years. The whole thing is, so clearly connected to feds. I mean, I could go off on that. I've done probably 100 interviews and 1,000 lectures just on the Fedsurrection elements of the January 6th pipe bomber. But the fact is it's the same thing here. You have this tag team of the FBI and the Secret Service, this 1-2 punch, where the Secret Service has controlled the evidence and they destroy it, and the FBI then covers up under the cloak of an ongoing investigation. Remember, this is the same thing that happened with the January 6th pipe bomber. Kamala Harris lied for 10 months after January 6th, and saying that she was at the Capitol. This is actually in Justice Department indictments. People went to prison because judges and juries thought that Kamala Harris, the first black female vice president-elect, was being chased around by white supremacists in the Capitol. But then they had to do brand new grand jury indictments when 10 months later it came out that actually Kamala Harris was squatting over the DNC pipe bomb under Secret Service protection. She was escorted directly to the site of the pipe bomb. That pipe bomb was sitting on the front leg of the park bench at the entrance to the building. And it had been left there 17 hours earlier. Secret Service has an advance team. They were supposed to have swept it. Bomb sniffing dogs. We were told it was a live device. It was at the front entrance of the building. I walked over to it. It's right there. And the fact is what did Secret Service do? As soon as this came out, within weeks, they deleted all of their text messages. As soon as Jim Jordan and everyone leapt on it and said, "Oh my God, Secret Service is doing," they issued an update to the phones that magically wiped every single Secret Service text message the moment it came out that the Secret Service was responsible for the pipe bomb, that they were the ones who actually found the pipe bomb at about 1 p.m. on January 6th, and they were the ones who were supposed to have cased it the day before, when it was left out 17 hours earlier. And then what did the FBI do? The FBI, first of all, they took all of the videotapes. They only disclosed 2 from the site. One of them looks square over the park bench, and they only show him walking up to the park bench. Hey, FBI, where's the rest of the tape? They have the tape of the pipe bomber taking the pipe bomb out of the bag and putting it on the park bench. But they cut the tape when he walks up to the park bench. Did that same camera get struck by lightning, FBI? Now, the FBI used geofencing and to get the cell phone data of everybody who was around the Capitol. Well, why couldn't they get it for the pipe bomber? Because the pipe bomber was sitting on the park bench texting people. Well, the FBI said, it's the strangest thing. For some reason, the cell phone data was corrupted when we asked AT&T for it. So all we've taken is some with the FBI, and these entities are all related, with the telecom services and the federal government. They have this big favors for favors relationship. All we've taken is somebody at the FBI or the Justice Department or through an intermediary, talking to an intermediary over at AT&T and saying, "Hey, this thing's got hair on it. You know, just add a decimal to this file on the properties and then send it to us that way. And then boom, now, you know, the most wanted man in America gets to remain a ghost for 4 years. He could still be out there. Who knows? Maybe Thomas Crooks was actually the January 6th pipe bomber, because we were told that he created 3 live explosive devices that were in his vehicle or in his home that the FBI actually testified to. So think about this. Thomas Crooks, this 20-year-old loner. The Butler event was only announced 7 days before it was held. So in that time, he not only gets the idea out of nowhere to assassinate the president, but he scopes out the area with a drone, and then creates 3 live homemade explosive devices, and magically happens to be there. We're told from Josh Hawley's whistleblower there was supposed to be a Secret Service agent on the roof, but for some reason they left. There was supposed to be an FBI counter sniper team overlooking the roof, but for some reason at that moment they left. The whole thing seems perfectly coordinated. And then you have, again, the Secret Service squatting on the evidence and the FBI withholding everything under the cloak of an ongoing investigation. But there's another element of this too, which is that the DHS, which is the branch that Secret Service is tucked under, was the largest Fed presence on January 6th. DHS has a unit called HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, and they were the ones who were recruiting federal informants for in the Proud Boys and in the Oath Keepers and in the 3 Percenters. You can actually listen to Jeremy Brown's 45-minute secret tape of him being recruited by 2 DHS HSI agents to be a part of the upcoming January 6th protests and to basically be an asset for the federal government, and they leave him alone. It's a stunning tape, by the way, and this is validated in court documents from his indictment. But lo and behold, we now know that the Secret Service had a reduced presence for Donald Trump at that rally because of the NATO summit and the Joe Biden event that day. And Secret Service agents, many of them were replaced by DHS, HSI agents. Well, that's strange. Then you add to the fact that the New York Post just yesterday reported that the shooter had gone something like 40 times to the very shooting range that's used by DHS for training officers. What I'm trying to suggest here is 20-year-old loners don't just randomly get the idea to assassinate the president the moment he comes to the hometown. What if DHS, HSI had been already in contact with this person as a deranged loner who was willing to go out and shoot the president sometime, somewhere, at some point. And then when they learned he was coming to Butler, Pennsylvania, he got activated. He got pushed. It was like this is what happened in 2015 with the Garland, Texas shooting. You look this up. There was a whole criminal trial that went through. It took 3 years. It took 2 years after the criminal trial for it to come out that the FBI had secretly paid an informant $125,000 to radicalize the shooter and text message him to tear up Texas and encourage him to do it. And the FBI even had a car trailing the shooter before the shooting, before he did it. An entire set of headlines that ISIS had done this homegrown attack. We went to war with Syria over this, effectively, the Obama administration. We had an entire criminal trial that went out when the whole thing was ISIS, ISIS, ISIS. And it took a leak from the Arizona FBI office to the defense counsel for it to come out. Actually, it really wasn't an ISIS plot. It was an FBI plot. Well, what if that's the same thing here?
This is crazy, man. I love your mind. You're so good at researching and connecting dots. We got to get you back on the show. I know you've got to get ready for other shows and interviews. Mike Benz, I'm going to put a direct link to your Twitter down below so that people can follow you. We're going to get you back on the show. I had like 5 or 6 other questions that I want your mind to help me unravel. But thank you so much for coming on, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Steven.